A man named Leonard and his team show up at a cabin in the middle of nowhere, saying they are there to stop an apocalypse. The people in the cabin are shocked and don't understand how they're involved. While they are still confused, Leonard tells them that in order to save humanity from being destroyed, one of them has to die. A few hours earlier, a young girl named Wen is outside catching grasshoppers when Leonard arrives at the cabin where she and her family are staying for vacation. Wen feels scared because the man is so big, but as Leonard gets closer, he asks if he can talk to her. Still feeling scared, Wen tells Leonard that she doesn't talk to strangers, but Leonard assures her he won't be a stranger for long because he wants to be her friend. Wen looks puzzled, but Leonard explains that he's not a bad person and notices the jar she's keeping her grasshoppers in. He shares that he also loved catching grasshoppers when he was a child. Leonard then asks how Wen learned to catch them, and she says her uncle Eric taught her. As they continue talking, Leonard starts to look nervous and stares into the woods. Wen finally asks why he's there, and although the question makes him uncomfortable, he says he's there to befriend her and her family. Leonard then notices a scar on her lip and asks how she got it. Wen tells him she broke her lip when she was little. Leonard feels sorry for her and says that even though he doesn't have a visible scar, if she looks inside his heart, she'll see it's broken because of what he'll have to do. Later that day, Leonard looks into the woods again, and Wen suddenly spots 3 other people walking toward the cabin. This scares Wen, and she asks if the people approaching are Leonard's friends. Leonard doesn't answer her question. Instead, he tells Wen that she is his friend. He adds that, no matter what happens later, she must remember that they're friends. Wen gets even more scared, and Leonard then tells her that the 3 people coming are his co-workers. He also says they have the most important job in the world to do and that Wen and her family will have to make a huge decision. Wen immediately leaves Leonard and hurries toward the door. But before she enters the cabin, Leonard tells her that she needs to convince her family to open the door when he and his team knock. He warns her that if they don't open the door, he and his colleagues will have to break in. Wen becomes even more frightened, so she runs inside to warn her family about Leonard and his team. Red, Sabrina, and Adrian, Eric, and Andrew are shocked by Wen's concerns, but as they check through the windows, they see the armed group approaching and begin deciding what to do next. Just then, Leonard knocks on the door, but Eric and Andrew refuse to open it as they try to call the police. Adrian points out that they won't even be able to call the police because the phone line has been cut. Since they continue refusing to open the door, Leonard and the others decide to break in. Eric, Andrew, and Wen quickly block the doors and windows to prevent them from entering. Despite their efforts, the cabin is still invaded, and as Eric and Andrew try to escape, they spot Sabrina behind them, holding a weapon. Eric tells Andrew to take Wen to the car while he goes after Sabrina. Unfortunately, Sabrina knocks Eric down before he can harm her, and he loses consciousness. Andrew, angry, immediately attacks Sabrina, even though she says she can help Eric because she's a nurse. Before Sabrina gets hurt, Redmond steps in to defend her, but Andrew eventually overpowers him. As Andrew looks around for Wen, he realizes he's surrounded by the others, with Leonard carrying his daughter. Feeling powerless, he surrenders while Sabrina checks on Eric. Shortly after, Eric wakes up and finds himself tied to a chair, with Andrew also tied next to him. Leonard asks if Eric is feeling better, but Sabrina says he's still heavily concussed. Meanwhile, Andrew, growing impatient, starts accusing Leonard and the others of being part of a hate group that targets homophobic couples. Leonard and the others deny Andrew's accusations, but he remains confused as to why his family is being held hostage. Just then, Leonard calls the others to the living room to begin their mission. Andrew looks terrified, but Leonard reassures him that they're not there to harm anyone as they all gather in the living room. "My name is Sabrina," she says, standing in front and introducing herself as a registered nurse who used all her savings to find the cabin. Leonard speaks next, introducing himself as a teacher who also runs an after-school program. Then, Redmond introduces himself and says he works for a gas company, adding that he has spent time in prison for past mistakes. Following this, Adrian introduces herself as a line cook at a Mexican restaurant. As she continues talking, Leonard suddenly turns off the TV and announces that it's time to explain why they are there. Leonard then tells the family that he and the others are at the cabin to prevent an apocalypse. He adds that only Eric, Andrew, and Wen can stop what's coming, because one of them must die. Eric doesn't believe this and suggests that Leonard might be having a mental breakdown. However, Leonard insists he's not lying and tells the family they will have to decide who to sacrifice. He explains that if they fail to sacrifice someone, the world will end, and only the three of them will survive. He also says he and his colleagues won't force the decision on them. Andrew dismisses it as a lie, but Leonard explains that he and the others had visions that led them to the cabin, showing how the world would be destroyed by earthquakes, tsunamis, and other plagues. Eric and Andrew don't believe this, as they think the visions could mean anything, but Leonard warns them that every time they refuse to sacrifice someone, a plague will be unleashed. Eric looks confused, but Andrew accuses them of being religious fanatics who don't know what they're talking about. Leonard doesn't respond to this, instead asking if they're ready to nominate who will die. Eric and Andrew refuse, so Leonard and his colleagues pick up their weapons, with Redmond standing in front of them as they face the couple. Eric and Andrew beg for their lives, claiming they've done nothing wrong, but no one responds. Adrian then moves to place Wen on Andrew's lap so she won't witness what's about to happen. Just then, Redmond looks nervous and says he's scared. As Eric and Andrew continue to beg, Redmond kneels and covers his head with a white cloth, crying. Eric suddenly sees a bright light in the mirror and looks confused, wondering what he just saw. Before he can think about it, Redmond says that part of humanity has been judged. Almost immediately, Sabrina and Adrian strike Redmond in the head with their weapons, and Leonard finishes the job, leaving Eric, Andrew, and Wen terrified. Leonard and the others are also devastated by Redmond's death, but they quickly shake off their emotions and carry his body outside. When they return inside, Leonard turns on the TV and switches to a news station, where they watch a report about a series of earthquakes and tsunamis already happening around the world. As a live video of a tsunami is shown on TV, Leonard and the others are shocked because it matches exactly what they saw in their visions. Andrew still doesn't believe it's real, but Leonard tells him that a plague started when Redmond died. Andrew keeps complaining, but Eric starts to think that maybe Leonard and the others are telling the truth. Leonard then says that if they don't pick someone to sacrifice by morning, another plague will come. Later, Sabrina is in the bathroom, treating Eric's head. While doing so, she talks about how she began having the visions and how she met the others at the boardwalk leading to the cabin, just like in her visions. She tries to convince Eric that they are on the same side, but Eric says he's on his family's side. He's taken back to the living room, where Andrew asks if he's feeling better. Eric says he is, and Andrew tells him not to believe what they saw on the TV because the news is from 4 hours ago. Andrew also points out that Leonard seems to have planned everything perfectly because he's been checking his watch too much. Meanwhile, Wen sneaks down to the basement and finds a way out of the house. Leonard quickly notices this and runs outside to catch her. Even though she tries to hide behind a tree, he eventually finds her and brings her back inside, saying no one can leave. After Andrew admits that it was his idea to let Wen escape, he suddenly remembers knowing Redmond. Eric is shocked by this, but Andrew explains that Redmond was the man who attacked him at a bar years ago. He says Redmond's real name is O'Bannon, and he spent time in jail for it. Leonard doesn't believe him, but Adrian says they can't be sure because they met Redmond for the first time at the boardwalk. Andrew keeps accusing Leonard and the others of being part of a hate group. He tells them to check Redmond's pocket for his ID to prove his real name, but Leonard brushes it off, saying it doesn't matter. He then tells them to try to sleep because they'll need to choose someone to save the world in the morning. The next day, Adrian makes a nice meal for Wen, and while she's eating, Andrew secretly tells Eric that his rope is now a little loose. He says that if he can free himself, he'll run to the car and grab his gun from the trunk. Meanwhile, Wen finishes her food, but secretly takes a knife and gives it to Eric. She tells him she'll create a distraction when he gives the signal. Just before Eric can use the knife, Leonard tells him and Andrew they need to decide who will die. Andrew accuses him of being a bad person, wanting them to kill each other for no reason. Leonard, however, pulls out a picture of the kids he coaches at the school he works at. He says they're the reason he's trying to stop the apocalypse. Not long after, Adrian stands in front of Eric and Andrew, crying as she urges them to make the right choice. She says she has a child named Charlie, and she doesn't want him to die, but Andrew doesn't believe her. Eric begs her not to sacrifice herself, saying that killing herself won't stop the plagues. Adrian doesn't listen, and as Sabrina and Leonard get ready to kill her, Eric tries to cut himself loose. Andrew also struggles to free himself to stop her, but before they can do anything, Adrian is killed. After her body is taken outside, Sabrina turns on the TV to check if anything has happened. The news comes on, showing a report on a deadly virus that is already killing people. But Eric and Andrew realize it's a pre-recorded program. Andrew immediately calls it out, saying they've just played a recorded video. But then Eric tells Andrew that he saw something earlier. Leonard and Sabrina hear this and ask him about it. Eric mentions the bright light he saw before Redmond was killed. Andrew thinks it might be because of the concussion he had, but Eric says he doesn't believe Leonard. Just then, Eric gives Wen the signal, and as she starts screaming, he cuts the rope. But before he can do anything more, Leonard and Sabrina stop him. While they're distracted, Andrew frees himself and sneaks out. When he reaches the car, Sabrina appears and tells him not to leave, but he ignores her. She then injures his leg, and even though he's in pain, Andrew throws sand in her eyes and gets into the car to grab his gun from the trunk. Sabrina still tries to stop him, but when he finally gets his gun and threatens to kill her, she runs away. Andrew goes back inside and threatens to kill Leonard if he doesn't drop his weapon and let his family go. Instead of complying, Leonard asks if they're ready to make a choice. Andrew gets angry and says they're not making any choice. Just then, Sabrina suddenly charges at him, and in the shock of the moment, he shoots her. Realizing what he's done, he looks stunned. Leonard doesn't seem to care, though. He finishes off Sabrina and takes her body outside, saying another plague has been unleashed. Soon after, Andrew goes outside to check Redmond's dead body to see if he's really O'Bannon. The ID on the body confirms it. Andrew confronts Leonard, accusing him of being delusional, and leading the others to attack the innocent family at the cabin. Leonard denies doing anything like that, but Andrew still doesn't believe him. Then, Andrew forces Leonard into a bathroom and demands the key to the truck that Leonard and his group arrived in. Because they already punctured Andrew's car tires, Leonard refuses to hand over the key, so Andrew locks him inside. Before walking away, Andrew hears the sound of a broken window. Even though he's scared, he opens the door to check if Leonard has escaped. Though the window is indeed broken, Leonard is hiding behind the curtain and attacks Andrew. Leonard then grabs the gun, saying he won't let them leave the house. He also orders them to turn on the TV, confirming that another plague has been unleashed on the world because of Sabrina's death. While Andrew refuses to turn on the TV, Eric does it anyway, and they see that the world is still in danger of total destruction, with several explosions reported on the news. Leonard stands in front of the TV, repeating the exact words the newscaster is saying about the recent explosions. As Leonard continues talking, Andrew breaks the TV, accusing Leonard of having seen the news before. Since it's clear that Leonard knew what the newscaster would say through his visions, Eric starts to believe him. Andrew, still shocked, insists that it's all a lie. However, Eric argues that it's unlikely everything happening on the news is just a coincidence. Leonard then tells them to follow him outside. Eric tells Wen to hide in a nearby treehouse while he and Andrew stay with Leonard, who sits on a chair and begins narrating how terrifying his visions were. He also says that it's not too late for Eric and Andrew to make a choice. He asks if they'll make the decision, but when they don't respond, Leonard cuts himself and bleeds to death. This seems to cause a dark cloud to form in the area, but Andrew still wants them to leave. However, Eric says they can't leave because he believes the sacrifice truly needs to happen. He then mentions the bright light he saw and says he knew he felt something. Andrew tries to change his mind, but Eric argues that the sacrifice might be something other families have been doing in the past. He adds that it might just be their turn. Even though Andrew now believes an apocalypse is coming, he still doesn't want either of them to die. Eric says he's ready to do it for Wen. He begs Andrew to shoot him, thinking about his daughter enjoying life in the future. Andrew doesn't want to do this, but Eric forces him. After Eric takes the shot, he dies, and Andrew looks devastated. He heads to the treehouse to pick up Wen. When Wen sees that he's alone, she asks if Eric already made the sacrifice, and Andrew confirms this. Together, they leave and watch the cabin burn after Andrew sets it on fire. Since Andrew now has Wen's keys, he leads her through the woods to find his truck. When they eventually find it, Andrew drives them to a restaurant where they see many people watching the news, hoping to confirm if they're now safe from the chaos happening around the world. From the news, Andrew sees that the chaos has stopped. As he hears survivors talking about how relieved they are to be with their families again, he realizes that Eric did the right thing. Afterward, Andrew returns to the truck with Wen, and they take their seats. He checks the bags inside the truck and finds evidence confirming that Leonard and the others weren't lying about who they were. They put on their seatbelts, and Andrew drives away.